Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I'm joined again this week, every week, one of my favorite days of the week, my favorite conversations with Andra Watkins from the Substack For Such a Time as This. Andra, how you doing?
I'm carrying the weight of all these apocalyptic beliefs this week.
Oh my God. I mean, how do you really feel? This is so. Look, you've been writing this week about the war in Iran, but from a context and from an angle that I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to until recently, when news sort of flooded out. So, you know, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, since the war began last Saturday, has been flooded with complaints. You've been writing about these complaints, and a couple of other Substackers have also been releasing information about this. But over 200 complaints have come in from personnel across every branch of the military at more than 30 installations. And service members report commanders telling them the Iran war is all a part of God's divine plan.
Yes.
And that Trump was, quote, anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon. Like, it pains me to say those words. And the thing is, like, this isn't rogue behavior, right? This is coming from the very top. So let's start there. What is this plan, and how does the Iran war tie in to the potential for Armageddon?
Within the first 2 weeks of starting my Substack, which was formerly called How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life, I warned readers that white Christian nationalists, certain pockets of them, believe that we are living in the last days of the earth. So they don't believe in climate change because we're living in the last days of the earth. They don't believe we need to help our fellow human beings because in the last days it's going to be so terrible anyway that we might as well not help ease anybody's suffering. They're nihilists because the world is ending within the next 20 years or so, Sam. It has to, according to their interpretation of the Bible. So, we don't need to do anything but accelerate that as much as we can. So I warned that this regime, if we elected this president, would be full of people who believe this prophecy. One of the worst things that could have ever happened to this planet was for Mike Huckabee to be selected to be our ambassador to Israel, because he is a die-hard, full-on, last days, Armageddon, apocalyptic beliefs, antichrist ambassador.
But
he uses his Bible to conduct all foreign policy.
Yeah.
Which is just horrifying. But again, I said this is what they would do if they won. And so I have written reams about these beliefs, because if you didn't grow up in white Christian nationalism like I did, or you don't know anybody who's in this cult, this sounds insane. I mean, my husband and I were talking about before I got on today, and he was like, if somebody had said this to me and I didn't know you, I would have said, well, that's just crazy. Nobody believes that. But he's like, now I know, Andra. Millions of people believe this.
Well, look, I have actually a poll that you ran in one of your pieces, and then this is really difficult to see, but I kind of zoomed in here. These are the people who believe Jesus will return. And this is, keep an eye on this, all U.S. adults, right? This is a poll of all U.S. adults, and you get into the crosstabs and the demos and all of this stuff, and as you imagine, the evangelicals are way higher but this is an average across all U.S. adults. A majority of Americans believe that Jesus will return. to the earth. Perhaps some of you in the audience believe that. Wonderful. That's great. And this is a thing that, Andra, you've taught me patience and humility and empathy and tolerance for others' opinion. But here's the thing. If you're Mike Huckabee or you're Pete Hegseth and you believe this is happening, and then you believe that your life's goal is to hasten this, then you're actually, that's not tolerance, right? You are affecting my life by bringing on the Armageddon.
Right.
And this is what's happening. So look, I want to kind of dial this back, because we've talked, like everything we talk about has these weird historical roots, and they're like historical, right? They're not based on actual events or actual science, or they're based on the beliefs, the historical beliefs of people going back thousands of years, right? So I want to start in near history, because I think it's quite relevant. You've written about the parable of the fig tree, and this is the idea that the generation that was alive when Israel was founded in 1948 has to see Armageddon, right?
Yes.
Okay, those people are turning 78 this year. Is that why this is happening now? Are they literally running out of clock in this Armageddon game?
Yes. I mean, I was always taught, and multiple, Mike Huckabee would be a believer. Mike Johnson would be a believer. Ted Cruz would be, I'm naming people. Mike Pompeo, if you remember him, would be a believer in this particular interpretation of the parable of the fig tree that Jesus offered in Matthew 24. So the parable of the fig tree, and you know, the Bible reads like metaphor. It reads like poetry. It doesn't. You can put multiple interpretations on just about anything in there, and people do. So you know, that's why multiple verses have people saying it means this and other people saying it means the opposite of that. And who knows? You know, only God can say what it really means. But white Christian nationalists are convinced that the parable of the fig tree meant that God would call back together, and when the tree blooms, and that happened in May of 1948.
Okay.
May 18th, 1948, you know, Israel came back together as an official nation, an official state. So they believe that started the clock for the last days of the earth and for Jesus to return. Right. Never mind that in the same place, in the same passage, Jesus also said you can't know the day or the hour. And people who predict the times, it will never be that time. I mean, I've always seen this whole thing as a metaphor for just live in the moment and don't worry about what happens in the future, because, you know, you can't know that. That's how I read it now, but right. They don't. You know, it was a very specific date and time interpretation for them. So when you have no faith and your faith is certainty, and you're certain that your interpretation of that verse is the correct one, and you're in your 70s or your 80s and you've lived your whole life thinking that Jesus was going to return by the time you die, you start to become really desperate to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's what's happening here. They've become really desperate, in my view, to make this prophecy come true.
And I kind of want to hold on that just for a second, because my camera just adjusted. So let's hold on that for a second. It seemed the idea that there's a prophecy from thousands of years ago that says that when events are appropriate, or when these things line up, the end of the world will happen. It's all whatever. That's great. Fine. But then making that so feels like a cheat code, right? Like trying to bring about the conditions in which the end of the world happens. It feels like you're circumventing natural events. And I know this is like a weird conjecture, like, I don't know, white, you know, cone hat sort of conversation, but like it feels
it's a
like
philosophical discussion.
it is, but it feels yes, thank you. But it feels like if you had a genie grant you 3 wishes and you just continued to wish for more wishes, like it's what first of all, what adult, and I want to get into the difference between faith and certainty in a second because I think that's essential here. But what adult is like, oh yes, there will be pestilence, there will be these things. It's a prophecy from thousands of years ago. And if it's not happening fast enough, then it's on me to make it happen. Doesn't that, at the surface, that's evil, right? If you are trying to hurt and harm and wreak chaos, then you're the agent of that chaos.
Yes. God is not. You are.
So how do they square that?
That's what I have said, if a person has faith and faith is whatever you want to define it as. I define it as whatever happens after we die, and whatever we believe happens makes us feel better about that.
Sure.
Because nobody knows what happens. So whatever we believe is a faith issue. But, they can't handle not knowing.
Yeah.
So this gives them this degree of certainty that they're going to be fine when they die. So it's and it has to be true. They can't countenance the fact that they could be wrong about it. That's another difference between a lot of the people here who would say I'm a Christian and them. People can say I'm a Christian, but I can accept that I could be wrong about what I believe. And someone else could be right about what happens then. Some other religion or no religion or nothing could be there or whatever,
Sure.
Lots of reasonable people are fine with saying this is what speaks to me, but something else speaks to someone else, and that's okay. But Christian nationalists can't fathom that. They can't handle that. So they have to have certainty. They claim to believe in an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God. So a God like that doesn't need anybody's help to do anything. So they really don't believe in that God, even though they claim to, because, God could make all of this happen without Mike Huckabee's help or Mike Johnson's help. But they have to help God because they've made themselves as God and violated the second commandment. And there are millions of Americans. I don't think a lot of people anywhere understand how many millions of people, the 92% number in the evangelical Christian camp on that table. 92% of evangelical Christians believe that we're living in the last days and that Jesus is going to return sometime in their lifetimes. And they believe that maniacally. So it's really difficult to help other people understand that they destroy their whole country and the whole planet to see their Bibles come true.
Yeah.
That's more important than anything to them.
And that, you have a really elegant framing of the difference between certainty and faith. And this is something that I've kind of struggled with throughout our conversations, but it was so clear that the idea of faith is, as you said, a belief that's not based on any kind of fact. It's just a faith, and it might give you comfort to believe it, but you can accept that it may not be true, and it may be true, but it doesn't matter. You have faith in it. And that is something that fills you with hope or longing or belief or whatever it is it fills you with. But certainty is something entirely different. It's based on certainty, right? It's based on fact. And this is, I think, the reason it struck me, I think, this week in your work is because it feels like that is the cornerstone of the white Christian nationalists in our government is that difference. Right. It is no. This isn't something that fills me with comfort. This is, in fact. It is true. And you cannot behave in any other way beyond what I personally am certain of. It's a real subversion of all of this, and you know, we have it's causing like an incredible amount of suffering. You know, a commentator says that, you know, commanders are especially delighted with how graphic this battle will be, zeroing in on how bloody all of this must become to fulfill end times prophecy. And you wrote that, you know, the white Christian nationalists actually want that suffering. They crave chaos and death because it tells them their Bibles are coming true, even if they're the agents of that chaos and death. So how does someone who genuinely believes this interpret, say, you know, Americans dying in Kuwait?
Your camera's frozen. Okay, I think you unfroze it just there.
Oh.
Or maybe you didn't do anything.
No, it's the hand of God. Don't ask this question. But how do the white Christian nationalists interpret the death of American soldiers?
It paves the way to judgy book of Revelation, Jesus's glorious return, Sam. Right. You know, of course, millions of people, perhaps billions of people are going to have to die. You know, if for those of you here who aren't familiar with these prophecies, the Bible says that in the last days, perilous times shall come, and nation shall rise against nation, and people against people, and there will be wars and famines and pestilences in diverse places, and droughts and earthquakes and natural disasters and fires. And, you know, the whole world will be on fire, and the whole world will be at war. And I was always taught, and lots of other white Christian nationalists were taught this as well, that the United States isn't mentioned in the last days of the Bible.
Right.
You know, they have all of these countries that they've looked at ancient maps and said play into the end times, but the United States isn't mentioned. So therefore, the United States probably needs to be decimated in order for these prophecies to come true. So millions of Americans in November of 2024 voted to decimate their own country on purpose because, you know, it had to not exist. My childhood pastor used to say that all the time to us, for the last days prophecies to come to pass. I mean, the whole world has to melt down, and how better to melt down the world than to destroy the world's biggest economy and the world's currency. You know, so because every nation, every people has to be under so much duress and so desperate and so horrified by everything that's happened that they would accept one man, one leader to fix it all. And so that leader they predict is the Antichrist. And Peter Thiel did a series of talks on the Antichrist months ago. And that was by design. Whether or not Peter Thiel believes personally in the Antichrist, or, you know, if there is an Antichrist, I think he's probably it. But, you know, he's just an awful person. But, you know, he knows that there are millions of people who believe in that. And so a person like him with all his money and his platform talking about it fulfills and underscores their belief in it. And gives them permission to be even more radicalized and crazy about it. So that was by design, in my view. But, you know, that is what they believe this is leading to, is this meltdown of the world that would cause everyone on this planet to be desperate enough to accept one world leader.
So,
and our soldiers, us, you know, if a bunch of us have to die for that to happen, then that's just part of God's plan.
Right. I just want to, you know, everyone out there watching, this is our Andra and my conversation every week. It's this peek behind the curtain of Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. And this week we're talking about the complaint that's started to surface. It turns out that, you know, something like 15 troops from various backgrounds have complained that one of their commanders opened a combat readiness briefing with Book of Revelation citations and declared Trump divinely anointed to trigger Armageddon. And clearly that's very alarming, to say the least. But I want to kind of dial into this because, you know, we've talked about the war in Iran. So much ink and airwaves have been dedicated to the idea that, well, Trump doesn't really have a plan. There's no strategic mission here other than just to drop bombs, right? And if you were kind of, you know, sorting through the tea leaves here, you would say, well, if he had a mission, it would be chaos. He's considering arming, you know, anti-regime militias, which would trigger civil war, which would trigger a refugee crisis that the world has never actually experienced quite like this. There's 90 million Iranians, 4 times as many as in Syria, and you understand what happened in that refugee crisis, right? Netanyahu is also really wonderfully happy to sow chaos because he believes that it gives him a stronger grip on hegemony in the region and no unified rivals. It's incredibly short-sighted, obviously, because chaos, who do you who do you negotiate with if you have a million factions fighting each other? Who is your enemy in that case? So it's really hard to understand. But the thing is, there's this pipeline, right? Hegseth runs a monthly Christian worship service at the Pentagon, and he's done it
an illegal monthly Christian worship.
An illegal monthly, and you know, pushes out the video of it, and everyone is like, how is this possible? And of course he says it's voluntary, but you know, when your boss says something is voluntary, it's not really voluntary. So he, I believe it was last month, maybe in February, he invited Ralph Drollinger. Is that who we're talking about today? No. No, sorry.
Doug Wilson.
Doug Wilson. So he invited Doug Wilson, who is a pastor who he follows, to come and open this with a prayer. I just want to run a little video to remind you who Doug Wilson is.
The people that people come out of.
So you just think they're meant to have babies? That's it. They're just a vessel.
No, it doesn't take any talent to simply reproduce biologically. The wife and mother, who is the chief executive of the home, is entrusted with 3 or 4 or 5 eternal souls.
I'm here as a working journalist, and I'm a mom of 3.
Good for you.
Is that an issue for you?
No, it's not automatically an issue.
Wilson says in his vision of a Christian society, women as individuals shouldn't be able to vote.
So this is the guy who is inspiring the war in the Middle East. So, you know, somebody, who was it? A Cornell sociologist said the end times theology didn't infiltrate the military. It was actually invited in.
Yeah.
Talk about Hegseth and how this whole thing is built up in our government. And then I want to go back to where your husband has gone back this week, to the actual crusades. So first, talk about the government.
So Pete Hegseth, much has been made of his talking about crusades, new crusades. He has Crusader tattoos. Much has been made about that. You know, he is in a branch of Christian nationalism that actually believes Christians have to take over the whole planet for Jesus to come back.
We talked about that,
yeah, initiating.
Is that the?
Yeah. So
see, I'm learning, Andra.
And Catholics, you know, Opus Dei Catholics aren't as on board with this whole end times thing. But they also believe that it's their job to take over the planet for the true Christendom, which is Catholicism. So a big part of that has to be conquering Islam, which is, the other like huge religion on this planet. And, that ties in with the apocalyptic end times Armageddon Christian nationalist beliefs that this war has to center on the Middle East.
Sure.
There are predictions in the Bible that there will be a big war in the Middle East, which is what I think somebody like Mike Huckabee would say is happening now, that would destabilize the world enough to lead to the rise of the Antichrist. So all of these people, because of their insistence that they are here to force the world to be Christian for one reason or another, have come together with this synergy that executing this war and starting this huge destabilization of the Middle East is God's will. Whether it's to bring about Armageddon, as some of them are saying, or whether it's just to bring about a destabilization of the world such that Christianity can take over and Jesus can return.
Right.
That's part of their mission here. Tomorrow, I'm going to write a lot about the different players and how they interpret the different countries involved and all of that. But, my biblical interpretations were that the Antichrist would rule from Jerusalem and that the temple has to be rebuilt where the Dome of the Rock Mosque stands now for this to come true. So Pete Hegseth in 2018 spoke to a group in Israel who's raising money for that temple and endorsed the rebuilding of that temple. And I can't even imagine what kind of awfulness would ensue to tear down one of the most significant mosques and replace it with a temple. But, there are people who want to do that. And the apocalyptic Christian nationalists support that because it's part of fulfilling their biblical prophecies. So it's really hard for people who don't have any interface with these kinds of beliefs to believe that there are millions of people who would destroy the whole planet to make their Bibles come true. But that's for the people who stood up in the military and said these things. I mean, one of my readers was an officer in the military, very high up. He's retired now, but he told me they started infiltrating the Air Force chaplaincies in the 1980s. So again, this kind of thing has been a long time coming. And they've worked toward it like they worked toward infiltrating a lot of the rest of the government.
Well, and working towards it in their mind is it's so childish. It feels like, all right, we've got a checklist. God gave us a punch list, a honey-do list, right? And we're just going to check it off. We're going to build the temple, great, check. Stoke chaos over here, check. Destroy these people, check. And it's grotesque and it's absurd, but it's actually happening. And you said, that they've been at this project for a long time. Let's talk about the actual crusades because something that it never occurred to me that you said in your work this week that your husband was like, wait a second, did the original Crusaders think that the end of times was coming? And you were like, I don't know. And then you did a little digging, and what did you find?
That the first crusade was driven by these apocalyptic beliefs. That the first Crusaders believed that they needed to liberate Jerusalem from the infidel because they were living in the last days of the earth and they had to bring about these prophecies. And there's a whole bunch of study about how people in that day reinterpreted the Bible and spun those prophecies to be a kind of propaganda. Right. To help Crusaders sign on to this cause and go and give their lives fighting in, the infidel and in Jerusalem. That's what they called it. By the second and third crusade, that had waned because Jesus had not returned and nothing had happened that they were being told would happen. So that is part of the history of this set of prophecies. We've had multiple instances. I mean, during the 30 Years' War, that's another instance where you can look and people thought they were living in the last days.
Right.
And that is a war on the European continent that killed at least 8 million people, but we'll never know how many people died in that war. And so that series of wars was one of the things that led to the Enlightenment. It was one of the things that led to the founding of the United States, because people said having this religion intertwined with government is killing people. It's horrible for the planet. It's horrible for humanity, and we want to do something else. So that's one of the things that led to the founding of the United States. So now our government has been taken over essentially by people who have the mentality of the first Crusaders, or the mentality of the people who fought in the 30 Years' War, the mentality of people who conducted inquisitions. And they are just as radicalized to bring about this destructive apocalypse so that they can feel better about their lack of faith.
Right.
That it would just happen if it's meant to happen without their help.
Right. And they have world-ending weapons.
Yes.
Right. This is a remarkable difference. And I have to say, there are two visions now of the world, right? And obviously, there's more nuance than that. There are many, many visions of the world. But there's a vision that I sort of in my core believe, and that is the world is full of incredible beauty, right? And if we are working to end that, then we are missing all of it, right? We are closing the Kennedy Center because nobody will perform there. We are changing the incredible, rich, and terrifying, and troubling, and wonderful history of the country and the world to suit our own particular vision. We're, having Kid Rock on the halftime show, like where, beauty is everywhere, and they are not seeing it. They're not living in this beauty. They see a future beauty in which Jesus comes back and all their problems will be solved. And I think that also brings up a sort of like, if I had to think about a motivation of some kid who's now a man, who's now a Mike Huckabee, for example, who's grown up in this faith and has been told that the joyous and incredible thing of, that will happen after the Armageddon is coming. Go tell your friends, and you go tell your friends, and they're like, you're an idiot. And you have to put yourself out on a limb because you have certainty, not faith, certainty that this will happen. How humiliating it would be to live decades and decades and decades proclaiming that this thing is happening now, and for it to clearly not be happening. Right.
Well, I mean, and I have personal experience with that. I mean, my family, growing up, we were at church all the time. We never went on vacations unless we went to visit other family, because we needed to be at church all the time. So we couldn't go away for long enough to miss church. So we never went anywhere. My parents, since they've been together and been in that church, they've not traveled much at all. They've not seen the world. They've not experienced things. They've, in my view, lived a very small life, but if it's a life that's made them happy, then more power to them. It's not my job to tell other people how to live.
Sure.
But you think about how your 80s and 90s and these prophecies still haven't come true, and you look on the, in the rear view mirror of your life now, because almost all of it's in the rear view, and you're approaching death. And I can imagine that you have these conversations with yourself internally when you have no faith, that, what if I've been wrong? What if I've squandered my whole life? What if I could have done so many other things that I chose not to do because my pastor told me that I had to do these things? And so I've done these things, but what if I was wrong? What if this is the only life I get? And and this is what I've done with it. And what I've devoted my life to really isn't there after I die. And regardless of what they say publicly, these are feelings that they have internally. And so I believe people in Mike Huckabee's position, you know, people who are older become more radicalized as they approach death, because so much of their life is in the rearview mirror now. And rather than confront, maybe I lived my whole one precious life for something that was a lie, they double and triple down on it. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot of when you look at that graph that we showed at the beginning and look at some of those subsets of that graph. I think, you know, that's a lot of what we're seeing there. It's very sad. And it is, you know, it gives me empathy for people who are in that position, but that still doesn't give them the right to put all of us through this.
Well, I know of at least one person who came up in the tradition and was able to get out of it, right? And so more than one can do that. And I think it's a really sad it's a sad scenario to miss out on the you know, richness and depth of a full relationship with your spouse, for example, where instead you're the boss and they're the employee and they're a person who people come out of, and that's it. You've missed so much of what it means to be human.
Yeah. And so, you know, that lack of humanity.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a lack of humanity.
Is so much of what's driving this. And, you know, this is all really doom and gloom. And I don't have anything to say to lessen the impact of that doom and gloom, other than the outcome of this that they want is going to be really terrible if they accomplish it. So all of the stuff that we've written and talked about with fostering community, getting your communities together, working collectively, building off-grid ways of supporting yourselves and your loved ones and your communities, you know, thinking through how you communicate. If we couldn't do this every day, for example, what happens if we have a meltdown of infrastructure? What happens, you know, those are things that are really important to be paying attention to now. And not, I don't want to sound like some sort of doom and gloom prepper, but the world that these people want to usher in is a world of horrors that, you know, I have the imagination to imagine, but a lot of people don't. So you have to take seriously that they believe this stuff and they are trying to make it come true. Yes. Whether or not they will succeed remains to be seen, but it can't hurt to do some things to get ready for the worst case.
I would add to that I have both faith and some level of certainty that Jesus is not actually going to come back, right? So when you say, you know, you don't want to be a prepper, I think we are preppers. I think we need to prepare for a future, because if we aren't preparing for a future, whatever a future looks like, the future will come and we will be unprepared. Right. That's the whole point. And so I think as a part of prepping for the worst, I think we also need to imagine the best, right? We need to imagine the world that we actually want to inhabit. We need to imagine the relationships and lives that we would like ourselves to lead and our children to lead, and work towards that, while at the same time preparing for this shit show that these people are bringing us.
Right.
And again, you know, there's a very low probability that Jesus is going to come back. That's spoiler alert, perhaps. But so instead of preparing for that, we need to prepare for what actually is coming next, because the world isn't ending.
And you know, that's one reason I'm still doing what I'm doing. You know, I'm not interested in bringing back the Constitution. As I've said many times, I want something better than that, where everybody has a seat at the table and everybody has opportunity, and that's a real truth, not something we just say that has an empty meaning and really only applies to white guys. You know, I want that for everybody. And so, you know, part of doing this work for me is working toward the world that I can imagine, that I want to inhabit in the future. And whether or not these people are successful, we all need to be preparing for what they might have in store for us and thinking about what we want the world to look like around us.
Well, that's a little more positive place to start to end than it was a few minutes ago. But Andra, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate these conversations, and everyone out there. If you haven't subscribed to For Such a Time as This, it is my call to action today. Go subscribe. You can subscribe for free. It's even better to subscribe as a paid subscriber because it supports the work that Andra's doing. It's very important. And these things are happening whether we like it or not. So we all need to be very informed on what's going on. This is not a conspiracy theory. They're releasing videos of all of it for all of us to see. There's no question what's actually happening. And here we are.
And you can think it's crazy, but I'll teach you what they believe. And you can still think it's crazy, but at least you'll know what they believe. And we can't defeat an enemy we refuse to understand. So learn about what they believe.
That's it. Andra, I shudder to think what we'll be talking about next week, but I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Andra. See you next time.
Okay.